So what exactly is it that you see glowing on Iron Man's chest? Or in the second Spider-Man movie, we see Doc Ock referring to something he calls the power of the sun in the palm of my hands. Or in the movie Passengers, we see Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence trying to fix the reactor that's powering their interstellar ship. Then there's Star Wars and there's Star Trek. So goes on the references to a fusion reactor in every movie showing a super advanced human race. So what exactly is it that we understand from this? Right from the time when fusion was achieved in laboratories, we've been so hopeful about it being the energy source of the future. We thought it'll help us colonize our solar system and one day the entire galaxy. So welcome to another video of Horizon. This is a channel where we discuss the frontiers of science and business. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do subscribe. Let's get on with the video. Every civilization requires energy to sustain and thrive. For us, for people on Earth, we have the sun. The sun is the major source of energy. Now, you could argue otherwise and say, no, we get most of our energy from fossil fuels because statistically get more than 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. Where do these fossil fuels get their energy from? Now let's just trace back the energy source of these fossil fuels. What exactly are these fossil fuels? These are combustible hydrocarbons that have been formed when plant matter was subjected to pressure for thousands of years under layers of rocks. So the energy in these fossil fuels is the sun's light energy that has been trapped using plants' photosynthetic mechanism. So the ultimate source of energy for these fossil fuels is the sun. Now let's take another example. Let's take the example of hydroelectric power. How do we generate electricity using hydroelectric power? The sun's light energy evaporates water from the oceans, which forms clouds. It moves to the land area and it drains down and fills the dams. In the dams, energy is stored in the form of potential energy of the water. Now, this potential energy is converted to electrical energy by running the water down and using it to turn turbines. So eventually, even for hydroelectric power, when we trace back the energy source, it always reaches the sun. So our sun seems to have an endless supply of energy. So if we could just create a sun here on Earth, all our energy problems would have a permanent solution. Before we can create a sun here on Earth, we first need to understand how our sun generates such huge amounts of energy. I think most of you might be familiar with the nuclear fission reaction, which is what happens in our nuclear power plants, and that's how we generate electricity from these plants. Now, nuclear fission reaction happens when a heavy nuclei splits to form two smaller nuclei. That's fission. Now, the exact opposite happens in a nuclear fusion reaction. In a nuclear fusion reaction, the elements of the nuclei of two smaller elements joins to form a heavy element. Now, under normal conditions, these two smaller nuclei would never come close to each other because of the huge electromagnetic repulsion between these two nuclei. So, unlike fission, we need extreme conditions for these two nuclei to fuse. Now, these conditions are attained in the sun, the core of the sun, due to the gravitational collapse of the sun due to its own mass. We know that the sun is very massive, so the entire mass of the sun collapses inwards, creating an immense amount of pressure at the core of the sun, pressure and temperature at the core of the sun, which helps attain fusion. Achieving such extreme conditions here on Earth is not possible by the brute force employed by the sun. We'll have to get more creative. So currently there are three methods by which we have achieved fusion in our laboratories. Firstly, there is the inertial confinement method, in which a tiny capsule containing hydrogen fuel is blasted with lasers for less than a billionth of a second, and the hydrogen fuel heats up and expands, causing a reflective shock wave which compresses the fuel and increases the density to such an extent that the electromagnetic fusion between the nuclei are overcome and the nuclei fuses. Then there is the magnetic confinement fusion. In this method, plasma is squeezed using superconducting magnets to cause fusion. Now this is how the ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, the world's largest fusion project currently under construction in southern France, makes fusion possible. Very recently, a company named Helion has come up with a new method called pulsed compression method, where the two rings of plasma formed at two ends of a reactor are fired at each other and is squeezed and compressed using powerful magnets to trigger fusion. So if we've achieved fusion in our laboratories, why is it that we're still using fossil fuels as our major source of energy? And where are all the fusion reactors? Now, before we can use fusion commercially, there are a lot of hurdles to be overcome. Now, the biggest hurdle is, as we've discussed before, we need extreme conditions for fusion to occur, and we need to put in a lot of energy for that. And so far, we haven't been able to get more energy out of a fusion reaction compared to the energy that we've put into the reaction. So it still isn't economically viable for people to run a fusion reaction. So scientists have been working on fusion for a very long time, and progress was very slow and hopes were starting to fade. Until very recently, researchers at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory at California achieved what is called a fusion ignition. Now, fusion ignition is a situation where you get more energy out of a fusion reaction compared to the energy you put in, and the reaction is self-sustained. This is the condition similar to the ones at the core of stars and our sun. So with this recent breakthrough, our hopes are soaring high, and maybe in 20 or 30 years, or maybe a maximum of 50 years, we'll surely have a fusion reaction commercially available for use. So the title of this video is how fusion is going to propel the human civilization to the next level, or how fusion is going to completely revolutionize the energy sector of the world. So in order to understand this, we'll be comparing fusion energy to the forms of energy that we're using, and we'll understand how it's phenomenally better than all the forms of energy that we are currently using. So let's take the example of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels account for 80% of the energy consumption of human beings. Now let's understand the drawbacks of fossil fuels. Firstly, we know they're not renewable. They'll only be available in the near future, and we'll not be able to rely on them for a very long time. Secondly, we know these fossil fuels have a very low energy density, which means you'll have to carry around, or you'll have to burn a lot of fuel to obtain a very little amount of energy. And finally, we know burning of these fossil fuels causes carbon emissions, which has been damaging our environment for a very long time. The next alternative is nuclear fission, which is what powers our nuclear power plants. Now, the fissionable material, which is the fuel used in these power plants, might be readily available. And even if the energy density of these fuels is sufficiently good enough, the waste generated from the fission reaction is extremely harmful for the environment. It is almost impossible to dispose of. It damages the environment in ways no other waste does. So that is one of the greatest, or one of the biggest drawbacks of nuclear fission. Now, there's another problem. Nuclear fission reactors, the nuclear power plants might undergo meltdowns, and it might lead to loss of lives and infrastructure and all that. Our last alternative for renewable energy is solar energy. Now, the problem with solar energy is that you need to construct a lot of solar panels in order to harness this energy. Another problem is that it will only be sufficiently available during the daytime when there's sufficient light, and in order to store solar energy for later, you'll have to have a large number of batteries. So in short, this is a very infrastructure heavy utilization of energy. So what if there was a way to generate a huge amount of energy from something as easily available as water, and there's nearly no waste being produced? That is what fusion promises us. Once fusion becomes commercially viable, you'll be able to produce the energy equivalent of burning of 1 barrel of oil from just 1 glass of water. So fusion produces 4 million times more energy than fossil fuels for the same amount of fuel, and this too with nearly no waste being produced. Now, when you compare the nuclear fusion reaction to the fission reactors which we have currently available, we know the fuel used in fusion, which is water, is easily and safely carried around compared to the fissionable materials which are used in these power plants. Now, the waste generated from these nuclear power plants is extremely hazardous to the environment, and while that of fusion is very insignificant, it's just tritium, and it's not very harmful to the environment compared to the radioactive waste generated in these nuclear power plants. Despite all these efforts, we're still not sure when fusion will be available for commercial use. Now, extreme optimists say it is only a decade away, while skeptics say it might take 50 years or more. Now, when fusion comes online, there is no telling what a fusion-enabled society will be capable to do. The promise of abundant energy and nearly infinite stores of fuel could open up the feasibility of everything from interplanetary travel to developing a functioning artificial intelligence. The only thing that's certain is that the cone of possibilities for humanity will widen immensely. So I hope all of you found this video useful. Please share your suggestions in the comment section. We'll be coming back with more similar topics. Thank you for watching and see you all in the next video.